Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Bryan Link, COO here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. On today's episode, we have another episode of Cut the Shit After Hours, where I'm joined by Bryan Law and Cameron Plato, my compadres here at Plow Networks. Over drinks, we spent some time getting into a couple of random topics as usual. And during the early part, if you like to watch a guy laugh harder than you've ever seen someone, this is a good episode to join us for. We spent some time talking about the process of IT work or IT integration during mergers and acquisitions and the challenges associated with that. We spent a little bit of time talking about recruiting, sort of where are we today versus a year or two ago and what's changed. And then we wrap up with a conversation about Walmart's unorthodox and frankly refreshing approach to cyber risk management. We think we found it pretty interesting and maybe a lesson there to be learned for all of us. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Cut the Shit After Hours. We've got the usual suspects. Oh, I can't even talk. Suspects. Yeah. I've had one sip of my drink and I can't even enunciate.
It numbed your tongue.
Exactly. We've got Cameron Plato with us to my far right and Bryan Law to my immediate right. And I'm Bryan Link.
Chewing ice?
Am I? Your host. Is he chewing ice already?
He's chewing ice.
Our producer Emily's given us explicit instructions how to manage the mic and not make noise, and you've already broken those
crunching
rules.
ice.
Good job. Sorry. We got kind of a grab bag today.
Good.
That's okay, I guess. We'll try to knit it together in some form or fashion. But as you two know, our audience does not know, we've done a good bit of work over the last 3 to 6 months around two, I'll call them M&A transactions, right? Where a company acquired another company and in another deal, a larger company divested a smaller company. So not the same, but some similar dynamics. And I thought it'd be kind of interesting to just talk a little bit about maybe the experience around that, some not specific to the deals, but more what lessons could be learned, particularly for people who are listening who might either be involved in something like that or maybe looking at it, and what they maybe ought to be thinking about as it relates to the IT side of the house. Because we think IT is super important. We think it's the most important thing, but we all know that in the context of an M&A transaction, it's just one component of many that would be considered, and oftentimes not one of the most important in the pecking order if you're a deal person or kind of on the transactional side of the house. So to get us started, Cameron, tell us a little bit. I mean, what are some of the challenges?
Sounds like I'm taking the first one.
You taking the first one, yes. What are some challenges the business team should be aware of when it comes to merging IT systems or groups in the context of a transaction?
Well, Link, I'd say I've been involved in M&A activity since probably as long as I can remember in terms of my career. And every single one, without fail, IT is the last thing to be considered. I mean, honestly, it's the one that's brought up like, oh, what about IT? Like, it's not.
It gets kind of assumed away.
Yeah. And I think they'll bring it up, but it's.
I didn't think it was that funny.
Cheese over here has the giggles, and he just can't stop for no reason.
Yeah.
I just feel somebody staring a hole through my left ear.
I poured you a small bourbon. I didn't. You didn't smoke a joint. I mean, what is going on?
I can't get it together. No, it's just funny because it's not funny.
I know. We're literally talking about M&A transactions, potentially the most boring topic in America.
He's crying. That just got me laughing.
Our producer is over there now figuring out how she's going to edit this.
Dude, when we first started this company, this had happened at a customer meeting though, and we'd just be like, "I'm sorry, I don't even know what we're talking. I don't even know why he's laughing."
When he teed up, no M&A thing.
What the hell is going on?
I wanted to say it's because you're the man. You're the man.
It's quite honestly the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
I'd like to apologize on behalf of the entire company.
Oh, I can't breathe.
We are 5 minutes in.
Oh,
So stupid.
that's what made it so funny. It was so
I'm coming
second
back
grade.
I'm just coming back around. All right. So people oftentimes forget about IT, or IT is brought in a little too late, and they're not given any budget to do any sort of true due diligence. So the thing that you run into quite a bit is, for example, our systems are perfectly documented. Here's a service asset inventory. Here's everything we've got. Blah blah blah. And then you get in there and you find out, well, that's not exactly right. Not only is it not exactly right, it's not even remotely right. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. It's way worse than we thought. Oh, also, they don't own any of the licenses they're using. So we've got that software sort of liability outstanding. We've got technical debt, that they just didn't quite disclose. And so, you can inherit a lot of risk. You can inherit a lot of liability that is buried inside the complexity of IT. So I would argue if there's ever a time to really kind of do your due diligence, it's during the M&A side. Not to mention it has operational impact when things just, frankly, are incompatible. They just don't work.
Sure. Well, one of the things I was thinking about was when things don't go well on the integration side. Where do you see fallout in the business side? Where's the most immediate impact?
I'd say probably at the CFO's desk, because usually, you paid something for a deal, like you thought.
Right.
Watch this.
God,
That's actually funny.
I can't take much more of this.
Somebody's walking by tiptoeing. All I can do is see her feet and
And now you
like
know.
Barbie,
Now you
look
know.
like Barbie shoes. Yeah.
God, this thing.
How did that make you laugh? And all that other stuff didn't make you laugh.
Yeah. So
I'm over here
Bryan,
crying.
no one had any idea why you were laughing. I still don't know.
he looks pissed about it too. Look, he's
But it was one of those points where it doesn't even matter.
You'll never
I'm
explain it
laughing
off.
so hard.
He's just
Everybody
angry.
should be
Yeah,
laughing.
that's true. That's
with
true.
me.
That's true.
So CFOs, it's usually on.
Because there's a cost.
Operationally, we can sort through it, right? I mean, it's technology. You can get over. You can pretty much make anything work eventually. But
I think the key word there is eventually. I want to come
eventually. Yeah. So it. Listen, when people are doing M&As, there is a hard line. There's a deadline for something.
The deal has to get closed.
And hell or high water.
That's right.
I've never seen IT stop it. I've just seen people lose their minds, but it inevitably gets done somehow, some way. So, but the cost overruns are. The surprises more than eat up contingency budgets. I can assure you in every one of these situations, these are not like minor rounding errors. They're major, major things. And they're absolutely avoidable if people would just get ahead of it and be proactive and just realize there needs to be a true IT assessment. And, I can tell you most of the times what I've seen is, you come up with even a reasonable amount of money. Let's just say it's $50,000 to do an IT assessment to avoid a $250,000 mistake. $50,000 is too much money. And then, $300,000 later, they're wishing that $50K would have been a good investment. It was usually just a little too late. They forgot about the IT part.
Yeah, I had a question here about how early should the IT teams be involved in the assessment process. But you're basically saying they should be sitting shoulder to shoulder with the business people.
They should be involved before the deal gets signed.
Right. No,
usually IT's brought into the fold after the deal's kind of done.
When the price has already been.
Yeah, price and the timeline.
Numbers have already been set.
Listen, we had a hospital client. I'm not going to say who it was, but you can do the math on it probably pretty easily. That bought a competitor that was equal to their size. It was another 70 or 80 hospitals, and they put a date and a time down without ever even consulting anybody in IT, period. And that included moving a data center from one part of the country to another into a facility that didn't have enough electricity to support that, which I'm like, I can't get the electrical municipal utility to build out infrastructure because of a date that you pulled out of your ass.
Right.
Like, doesn't happen. So,
but doesn't that speak volumes to what business people think about
it's
IT?
Out of sight, out of mind.
At the end of the day,
it's just it's like plumbing.
It does.
It's actually, ironically, it's very similar to the electricity thing. Like, you need more, you just plug it in and turn it on. It just pulls more. Well, that's not true. At some point, there's a capacity.
Right, and some of that's incumbent on us, I think, to do a better job of mapping that out for them around what is the impact of IT, right? In fact,
Yeah,
I totally agree with that.
the less you think it's happening, that probably means that there's way more going on than you think there is, right? I mean, it is true. I mean, if you were to, utilities are different but the same in the sense of, if you just flip the light switch on and things happen, a million things have to go right for that to happen.
Correct.
Over and over and over again, right?
It's like flying in a plane.
I think the way they build budgets around what they think is going to be needed is crazy, because it is flying blind. When you think about our job, well, if they don't get IT involved internally to then get us involved, we're way behind the 8 ball anyway, and it's a game of catch up that I've never seen pan out.
I think it's forgivable. I'll give you an example. If we were going to buy another organization similar to ours right now, and it was aggressive, we wanted to get the deal done, I can tell you who I would not invite to that dance to talk about it. IT. Because I wouldn't want to hear all the reasons why they said
we can't do it. Yeah,
I'd be like,
I
just
right.
too bad. Figure it out. And I'm not saying it's
Well,
right.
and that does. I mean, it does raise the question. I mean, setting aside the feelings of people, or the
reputation,
the friction and the sort of the pain and agony short term that comes during a merger or an acquisition on the back end. Like, you got a close date, all the shit's not done right, but we close anyway. So you just smash it together, and you're like, everybody will figure it out. Well, it's just going to be a bummer.
Every one of them has a second project behind it that was a secret project that everybody pretended wasn't real, was not a
now
budget
we got to come
item.
in and try to fix
and you got to come back
everything.
and do it the second go around, but this time we'll do it the right way.
Right, because you cowboyed
time.
it, you papered over whatever, you made whatever minimum things. And the truth is that frontline employees and customers are the ones who end up bearing the brunt of that. I mean, there's just I don't think there's any way around that. Now, maybe that's a cost worth bearing. I guess the question is there an investment? Your argument, I think I hear you saying, is that with some smaller investment on the front end, you could probably avoid at least 75% of that, maybe not all of it, but...
Well, so keep in mind too, like, IT is oftentimes like the vehicle that operations rides on. In other words, IT is kind of the business end of operations, if you will. And so the failure to identify issues in the integration of operations, I don't mean the technical integrations, but like, here's how you run your checkbooks apps, here's how we run our checkbooks apps, how something gets from the front door to the back door, whatever it is. They don't, and I say people have failed to sort through all that level of detail, and where the rubber actually hits the road is usually in IT. So it's seen as an IT problem. It's not. It's a business integration issue. Yeah. But IT is where it starts to present itself, and they're usually the ones that raise their hands because they can see, IT sits in the catbird seat a lot of times in terms of vantage points. Like, they can see how information flows through the organization. They can see how workflow starts and stops and that sort of thing. And so I think IT, in the case of M&A, is a lot of times just where things kind of come to the surface. So, and
you can, where we're using IT as obviously a catch-all, there's a lot of bits and pieces to that. I'm curious to hear y'all's thoughts with the advent of the cloud and having apps, in Azure or AWS or that sort of thing. I mean, real app, core, core apps, things that are really critical to the business, data analytics, operational, line of business applications, that sort of stuff. My assumption or my sense is that business people, particularly deal people who are, very often, so we're talking about M&A, that could be a lot of different things. There's, a small company like ours buying another small company. That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about large organizations where there's usually, private equity money, or there's money people involved, right? That's what they're about. They don't really give a shit about IT or anything else. They're trying to figure out how to make the economics work. My sense is that group of people thinks that IT integration ought to be a lot easier now because of the cloud. And I don't know if that's true or not. I just was curious to hear your thoughts.
I think business people in general think that IT should be easier. Forget M&A for a second with the cloud.
Well, and honestly,
safer,
I don't think they're wrong for thinking that, because that's how it's been sold. I'm saying I'm not sure it's true. I think there may be a marketing. I think the
complexity
problem
is certainly there, if not maybe even more so. But the agility or the speed in which you can make decisions, spin up resources, find remediation from a bad decision in that is way, way faster. So,
okay, that's fair. But I mean, think about just migrating. You've got two organizations that are 1,000 people each, and they both have Microsoft 365 environments that they use for collaboration, file sharing, meeting spaces, that kind of thing. wouldn't you think the average person would assume, well, those are the same, right? Don't you just take those people and put them over there?
Speaking as the average person, I would say yes.
Yeah, I think
we've just seen. I think we know good
Right.
and well that is not true.
Yeah. Now it's not as bad as it used to be. Frankly, I think it is easier than it used to be. It wasn't like you just picked up a hard drive and stuck it in the other server and like, there's our mail. I mean,
I wasn't trying to imply it was easy before.
yeah, but I think the perception is it is easier now than it's ever been.
Yeah, it's not push a button.
It's a different kind of easy, maybe, but it's still very cumbersome.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah,
and now, security has complicated the picture in a way that it didn't
way
before.
more, yeah.
Walled gardens were definitely easier because
for
before
sure.
all you needed was a different VPN and a user, and you got access to everything.
That's right.
With zero trust and conditional access, if you've got a bunch of complexity around application access inside an organization, remap it. If you don't have good documentation, back to your initial point, there's going to be big surprises that you weren't expecting.
Well, and I don't mean to downplay that's not the right word, but to minimize the acquired institution. But a lot of times before a company's acquired, things are kind of getting a little bit like short timer,
A little loose.
You certainly you're not going to make big cap investments.
Correct. So you find some garbage too.
Yeah.
I mean, like dormant users, contractor accounts, things that
deferred maintenance in all kinds. In all
again,
aspects.
that technical debt, right?
Yeah,
so,
really.
So you end up with a lot of stuff that you have to. I mean, you just inherit the bag of crap, and you have to deal with it too. And sometimes you don't find that until you're in the middle of the integration, and unfortunately, sometimes you got to clean that up before you can even integrate. And so, there's projects inside the projects.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that around the acquired company, getting acquired teams to work with you, right? There's a little bit of this is a challenge, right? I mean,
and then you get contractors.
Well, you've got contractors. There's a lot of fear in those kinds of situations, particularly in technology, because
for sure.
very often
very
the business
turfy.
people are like, well, these are redundancies. This is part of the package, the deal. We're going to get rid of. We've got
90% is considered a synergy,
and that's that's a tough place to be for both the acquiring company and the acquiree in that sense. In trying to get to that deadline, that's hard and fast.
Agreed. It's a tough thing for I think everybody involved, but in almost every situation where we've been a party to some sort of divestiture or acquisition, either end, we've been party to the ones being acquired. We've been party to the ones doing the acquiring. There's always a lot of surprise. That was absolutely completely avoidable had we done a proper assessment on the front end. And it's just, there's usually you're a third of the way into it, and it's an improper assessment because there's no budget. So you're being forced to half-ass it. And unfortunately, all the answers were left in what was half-assed.
Right.
Had we been allowed to do a proper
right.
assessment.
No. It's not a question of being able to do it.
Yeah. There's times, as you well know, that we've said, I don't really care if you're not going to pay for it at this point. I'm just going to step up and we're going to do it because we're going to be pregnant with this thing until it's done. So let's just do it right and get over who's responsible for and saying no to something. I think we're just trying to avoid our own headaches.
You're putting yourself in a situation where you don't know what you don't know.
That's right.
And that always bites you in the ass every time.
For sure.
So, all right. Well, it's certainly interesting work to be involved in, but man, it's an interesting kind of tangled web.
It's the most stressful work that we get involved in, to be frank.
Yeah, for sure, because you've got this hard deadline staring you in the face. You've got all these kind of competing power structures.
People get unreasonable.
Motivations are different. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of fear. There's just a lot going on.
Yeah.
There's just hard. There's hard deadlines with it, man. And
it's
the line is drawn in the sand. It's like you're going, like you said earlier. I mean, come hell or high water, you're hitting it. Yeah. It's going to happen. It's just, what does the aftermath look like as a part of making that happen?
Yeah. And I've got a buddy who's in investment banking, and they're mostly smaller deals. They're not public company deals. And he said the thing you got to realize, he's like, I've done however many deals he's been involved in, hundreds. He's like, almost every one I've ever done, it's that particular group or that particular person's. It's like the biggest, most important deal of their entire working life.
Yeah.
And so it has a level of importance. It's DEFCON 5, right? And Chris is it's just another day at the office. And he's like, I have to remember that this is it's not life or death, but it's as close as it gets in the working world for someone who's involved in that kind of a transaction.
I mean, people have spent their whole life building something that they're getting rid of, and
that's right. That's right. So that's a scary time. So, all right, let's switch gears a little. I was scanning the headlines this week, kind of thinking about the podcast, and depending on what news you consume, you can think everything's okay or probably not. You'd have to look at maybe Home and Gardens. I'm not sure what you would find to think everything's okay.
Look at.
But most of it is apocalyptic and terrible. But be that as it may, inflation's down a little bit. The supply chain issues, they're not in the news anymore. So for the most part, which means they're still there, but they're just not as, they don't take up as much. They're not as, fulfilling everybody's brain like they were before. The job market is still pretty good if you look at the data, despite everybody's belief that wasn't going to be the case. And I tend to always think that technology is a tighter job market than the job market as a whole, because you're talking about highly skilled workers, right? Even a entry-level tier 1 tech support person has a level of skills that the average person has no idea. I mean, it's like Sanskrit. Like they don't have any idea what they're doing at all, right? So they're scared of it. They don't want to learn how to do it. You could teach them, but most people don't want to do it. So which means your pool of potential employees, even at the entry level, is smaller than most fields, I tend to believe. So just curious, what is y'all's sense? Bryan, you've been looking more on kind of the sales and relationship management side. Cameron, you're obviously sitting at the top looking at more technical roles. What's your sense of, if we wound back a year, 12 to 18 months, fast forward to now, do you feel like the job market is any different than it was before? And we get into all kinds of factors about how that affects us, particularly being a small company based in Nashville, Tennessee, and all those factors are real. But just was curious off the top of your head, kind of what's your gut sense?
I don't think a lot's changed, but I think we're in a little bit of a bubble here. With our market
in Nashville
specifically. So I think it's probably changed in different places. There were some announcements that were made that were going to cause, big numbers in adding heads at some of the larger organizations that have kind of been put on pause. And I haven't heard if those have been lifted at this point. But I feel like it's still a very highly competitive market. I mean, we're still dealing with customers on a daily basis that need additional assistance because, whether it's a cultural thing for them, whether their pay is less than some, they're bringing people in and 30 days later, those people are rotating out. And, we're providing some services for those companies right now because they can't keep people,
right?
Which tells you that there's still a competitive offering out there, or a more competitive offering in some cases. So I don't see a lot here. I certainly haven't on the sales side. We haven't been ultra active on recruiting there, but the whole sales dynamic brings a whole different deal.
Sales and marketing is one that the market's never just chock full of awesome resources. I mean, it just doesn't happen. In 20-something years, the only thing I've seen is there's one good seller for 100 that are dog shit, and there's no in-betweens.
Shit,
and
he
so
said.
Either a rock star or you're horrible. And the horrible ones
just don't care.
Find jobs, and the really good ones, you got to go hunt them, and you got to nurture that for years and years and years to get them. And I mean, sometimes you get lucky, but I mean, I've never seen a market where somebody said there's a really qualified seller and they're out of a job. That doesn't happen. Sorry for anybody that's found themselves out of a job as a seller. I'm sure you got picked up quick, but the I think that's a weird market, sales and marketing.
That's fine.
Now,
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Now, technical people, to some degree, there's the same dynamic. Is if you're good, there's always a job out there. You're finding people more easily now than I think you did during COVID. And the reason being, I don't know the reason, but I think it's because people are finally like, okay, the world's not coming to an end. I can withstand a little bit of risk. I might put myself out there to try to find a job. And you are seeing some organizations kind of reassess how they're doing things. You're seeing people who were in-house IT now get outsourced, and so the job goes away. And we've picked up a number of people that were in-house IT for organizations that have now become employees that are providing services, obviously, to people as a contractor work. But as big as this city, well, and again, we're talking exclusively to Nashville, but as big as the city's gotten, there's not a plethora of resources. Like, we're still understaffed, if you will, as a community, I think, for what the demand is for quality people.
Yeah,
there's butts and seats. I mean, you can.
I would agree. I think for us too, and I know I thought this, I probably overestimated it, that the idea that we could, because part of this is because I'm remote. I live in North Carolina and work for a Nashville-based company.
Right.
And I think I probably sort of naively assumed, the world's changed, because it has, right? The remote work is possible, right? It works
is.
for, we have people that work remotely now, not just me. We have others. Having said that, the bulk of our recruiting is still relationship-based, which is still fairly
Localized.
geographically constrained. And I don't think we're that unusual in that sense. I think the idea that, just because we could have workers in Utah and Idaho and Rhode Island and Florida and Puerto Rico or wherever, doesn't mean we know how to find anybody there.
That's the hard part.
Yeah. And how do you look them in the eye, and how do you decide that they're a good fit?
You lack the triangulation of kind of the affirmation that person. It's not like you can call somebody who knows them, because you might, but
and I've read about organizations that are pure remote, and they do a lot. They do a lot of try before you buy. They have people be on contract for a while, and that all makes sense. It's not necessary. Every business model doesn't necessarily lend itself to that, I guess is the way and that's hard. Like, that means. For us, I know what we do. We then fall back on relationships. We fall back on I'd rather find somebody that worked for somebody that we know who's like, yeah, Emily's great, or Fred is awesome. Like, that kind of a vouching carries a lot of weight, right? And I think that's very old school, but in many ways still feels prevalent to me.
Yeah. I think when you don't have a market presence,
it's really tough.
It's really tough, man. And I think even when you just have kind of a remote market presence, it's still tough. When you think about the recruiters and the staffing companies, and that's where you end up, and you got to remember how they get paid.
Yeah,
at the end of the day too. So it's
turning bodies.
It's tough.
Yeah, I think it's weird for someone being hired by a company that's out of town, remote. Like, there's nothing really in your purview that validates the existence of that organization. So it feels a little weird, But I do find it crazy that we hire recruiters to find people that live 5 minutes from here in a market that we've been in for 20-something years.
That drives me crazy.
I'm like, I get it if we're out of town, for sure. It's just, recruiters provide a valuable service, but at the same time, I also think.
And this podcast is sponsored by your friendly local recruiter.
Yeah.
Recruiting company.
My daughter's in recruiting too.
And I will tell you, the recruiters have brought us some of the best people we have. So credit where credit's due. Could we have found them on our own? Yeah. Did we? We didn't. So I'm going to
probably not at in their defense. Probably not at that time. They're
Well, it's always a day late and a dollar short.
Yeah, the fact is, last 12 months, what it speaks to is that it's hard to find. It's hard to find qualified candidates.
Correct.
Period.
Yeah.
If it were that easy, recruiters wouldn't exist.
Correct.
If they didn't exist, we'd have to make them up.
When somebody's ready to go immediately, you've either caught them in an amazing moment in life, like conditions and the moons and the stars have lined up, or they're dog shit, and you just don't know.
Yeah.
And you're trying to kid yourself on the fact that that's the case.
You need somebody worse than you're in your mind, than you're willing to just sort of go along until you find the right
hope
person.
has become a strategy.
There is an entire subculture of what I like to call base jumpers that exist in this industry almost exclusively. And it's I'll spend a year to 2 years in one place until I'm found out.
It's a plan,
and then I'll go to the next one. And I'll go to the next one. And there are people I know well that are great people, but they just live in that
10 jobs.
Turn. So I don't know.
So along those lines, not that it's a little bit of a jump, but I think it makes sense. This idea of, we at Plow are not unlike a lot of companies in that we feel really good about our culture. We think it's a good place to work.
It's the best.
Well, we think it's the best. I happen to agree.
Hey, we got customers that say it's the best.
Exactly.
Had lunch with one today.
But the reality is, selling culture is something that, in my mind, if your company's worth a shit, that's what you're if you're not selling that, then you're probably not. Why would you want to work there if you know?
It's
Snacks.
Yeah, snack. We have snacks, but
you know what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
culture, but how do you communicate culture
You can't.
to prospective
It's
employees?
a
particularly in a remote recruiting environment.
no way.
Like,
Well, because culture really at that point, it's about is somebody going to be a pain in your ass or not, and that's about the extent of culture I think you get when you're far away.
I mean, it feels very commoditized in that sense. Like, and I'm not saying remote working is a commoditized relationship. I'm just saying it's harder. It's harder to
but
impress
it's more
upon.
commoditized than not.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge. I
Yeah.
mean, for us, I would love for us to have more employees who work kind of in the West Coast time zone, because that would help us with some of our support. But like, it also makes me think like it would be a real challenge. That's a real challenge to us and to someone we were to hire, to make them feel like, how did they get the Plow experience? Like, that's not easy to do.
Interesting point was we have an employee who was here for a long time, and then she moved to Florida, and she was afraid she's going to lose her job. And we were like, no, God, no. I mean, you keep doing what you're doing down there, whatever. But I think if you were to ask her, I would think she would tell you that while she still thinks the culture is what it is, it doesn't feel the same to her now
Because she's not here.
Because she's not here.
Yeah.
And so
And she's super biased, like just in general. She's been
she
around.
comes
She's
back.
very-
She comes to events. She does
Yeah.
things. But it's
and she's into
I think that's like it's got to be super intentional. Like the manager, the leader of that group that has those people has got to be more intentional than anybody else that we have in the way they bring those folks together.
I do wonder. I mean, I say this is in contrast to what we're doing right now. So maybe this is maybe we need to rethink this. I don't know, but it feels like as you look forward, if you're going to try to run a company and structure the way you do things to try to deal with what we're talking about, is you think you'd see stratification, either pure remote or pure, I won't say on-prem or in the office all the time, but for the most part, local in the office for the most part, and really try to be, a lot of face-to-face interaction to sort of reinforce what we're talking about. Because to your point, if you're pure remote, you can spend money on things differently than if you have to have if you're trying to split the difference. If you've got an office and you've got in person, but you've also got remote. Because I give the guys at 37 Signals, the base camp guys, they've been remote for a long time. They don't have an office, so they don't have any of that expense. So they use that money. They pay above market salaries is one thing, but like they have, I don't know, maybe quarterly. They bring people from all over the world into Chicago and have a big event, and it's like 3 or 4 days.
pretty cool the way they do it. Yeah.
They spend all of their time thinking about how do we make a remote experience have a culture.
Yeah.
And if you're not that way, if you don't think about that all the time, if you're going to think about it 15% of the time, does a half a loaf get you there? I don't know. I mean, it's
I think it's an interesting thought. I think, and there's validity to it. I'll tell you the thing that I've noticed about remote work. Not that this is exactly where you wanted to go with this conversation, but I think that it's harder for people that are the kind of in the paying your dues phase
the
of
younger
their career.
Ones.
You learn a lot by being present.
Yeah, there's
and
some
being
osmosis
around.
that goes on when you're
100% there is
for sure.
And so I don't see those people being necessarily left behind, but they're not getting the exposure to maybe adjacent career paths or
I agree.
And I think and that's part of culture too, is being getting that advancement or that
Well, if nothing
career
else,
path.
seeing. I mean, if you're in an office with people that are doing different things,
what
see
you do and
some
what you
other
don't
people
want to
doing
do.
stuff, and you might even ask it. You getting a cup of coffee. Hey man, what do y'all? What
is that?
do?
Why?
What do y'all do over there?
Yeah, right.
And you're never going to ask that
You're
if you're
missing
at your
that.
house.
That's right.
On Zoom or Teams meeting with your team.
That's
you're
right.
only going to know about your team.
Yeah,
I think you'll have no idea about the others.
Yeah, so I think some of that stuff, the way people interact with each other becomes a fundamental element of culture, and that interaction gets somewhat distorted via digital means. I'm a proponent of in person. I'm not a stickler for it, but I'm a proponent of it for those reasons.
Yeah, and for us, I mean, I think kind of backtracking what I said earlier. I guess we're hybrid, right? We have people that work. They can come to the office or work from home,
Right.
but most everybody is in this area, right? We have some remote, but for the most part, I mean, I'm remote, but like I've known you guys for years.
Like 70-80%.
So that's not. I'm not a true. Like I didn't get hired by Plow, plow.net from some whatever, and had no idea who you were. Like it wasn't that. And same with Renee. Like we've got, a variety of people who are remote. Now we've had success with, Alec was a pure remote employee and it was very successful. I mean, he moved on to other things because he got a better opportunity. Good for him. But that was a successful pure remote hire.
Correct.
And we brought him in, he fit in, he did a good job. So it can be done. But I do think here, we're still probably more traditional than we are a pure remote company, even though
not as an ideal.
Depending on what day you walk in the company, if you walked in the office, you might think, wow, nobody's even in here, because depending on the day, there might not be that many people here. Anyway, last thing I wanted to ask, and this was more a mention of something that we did recently. We rolled out a company-wide profit sharing plan. And in the context of recruiting, talk to me a little bit about why you guys decided to do that, and what was your thinking on that as it related to both existing employees and potentially, or did you even think about it in the context of attracting new employees?
You made us do it.
I did a little bit. I'm answering the first point there. Like, did we think about attracting new employees? I did. One, because I think it's a differentiating thing, because usually the only people who are capable of pulling upside are the people who are super risk tolerant, or just kind of cowboys by nature,
or senior or
salespeople or senior level people, right?
Yeah.
And you know what? This shit doesn't get done by just 2 or 3 people, right? I mean, everybody's involved in it, and it's a bit of a community team effort. There's also another side of which is maybe a little the reverse, and that is, you want to be like, sometimes you're asked to do things that's not specifically in your job description, but if it's for the better of the organization and you're getting a piece of the pie, then shut up,
right?
And our culture here is where people, I don't know of anybody we've had to pull that lever on. So it's very easy to say that. There's not anybody here that's been like, well, I don't get paid for it, so I'm not going to do it. That just doesn't exist inside here. Yeah. But maybe as a thought, but it's certainly not verbalized. But I think we wanted to try to set up an environment where everybody felt they could. One, it was to get people tracking to the same goals, right? It's making sure that you understand that here's the objective. If we hit these objectives, then here's the carrot, and not just the carrot for some, but the carrot for all. And so that keeps everybody collectively focused. All boats rise with the tide, kind of thing. But in terms of recruitment, I think a lot of people think about their job and their salary as the 2 components, like what's expected of me in terms of hours and work effort and that kind of thing, and then how much am I going to make for it. And I think that there's a lot of nuances to those 2 elements, right? And so I think that this partially tried to kind of fill in some of those gaps with something meaningful and reasonable, and something you could also make sense of. So
it's funny I asked the question, because I honestly, you're not wrong, Bryan. I did push you guys on this one, and it wasn't. I didn't think of it as a recruiting thing. But now that I think about it, I did in a sort of a back end way, because I figured, if you think about the guys we have on the team now and the folks that work here already, how many of them have recruited other people to come here, right? We have a number of employees who came here because of someone who already worked here.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, and I was thinking, and I feel very blessed to be able to say this, that we're in a really good place with the team we have. I feel like we've got a lot of good eggs, a lot of really strong contributors. And I was looking at it really from a defensive perspective, like, I don't want them to leave, right? And so I felt like
a big part of
if they had a strong incentive plan in place where they felt like, man, the owners of this company, they're bringing us in on them, they're dealing us in, so to speak, right? We're if this company does well, I'm going to do better than what I've got on my base salary, because right now, no matter how good I do my job, I'm going to get $55,000, whatever it is, right? But then because of that, if they feel that way, then they're more likely to tell other people, hey, you know what's going on in my company?
Question.
Like, or when people are bitching about, our company, I found out our company made all this money and I didn't get shit. And they're like, well, where I work, that's not the game we play. Yeah. It's different. That is it's both culture and recruiting, because that's an attraction model, as opposed to having to go out and hold up a sign that says, hey, Plow, we're great. We've got people that work here that are saying.
Yeah.
So I guess I did think about it, just not really in that kind of a sort of chain of, or I guess causal mechanism.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a differentiator. I looked at it both ways early on. I was glad that and we had socialized something.
We talked
like
about
that
for years
in the past.
It was
and
not.
You drove it though, and I think I think it was a timing thing. I think the timing made sense.
Yeah.
And again, back to the competitiveness of this market and what's going on in the market.
In Nashville,
to your
in particular,
point, to your point, I keep forgetting to say that. To your point that there are competitive offerings out there, and you want to be able to differentiate any way you can, whether it's a profit share or some snacks or whatever whatever it is that drives people and
Profit
motivates
share is
them.
a little easier.
Yeah.
It's a little harder to do and a little less able
for sure.
to be replicated.
And I would say, like to your point, at
We'll
parties
double down
too.
on snacks if we want to get rid of the profit share.
I mean, we have Little Debbie's now. I'm just saying.
There's good stuff down there.
You don't even have to bring up like at the party could just be or the being out having a conversation and talking about profit share, and then people are like, whoa, say that again? What do you mean?
What does that
What's
mean?
profit share? It's like, oh, we have upside based on how the company does.
You mean
like,
you don't?
What? Yeah, exactly. And some of the people we're going to hire, they're going to come in and that's all they're ever going to know.
Right.
And
They
they're
don't
going
know
to be in a
the difference,
situation at some point, and they're going, hey, what's the profit share like? And they're going to be like, you can keep your job?
Yeah.
Like, you
What are
can
you
come
talking
to
about?
work?
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
So,
All right. Well, let's kind of close out here. There was an article I think maybe 2 weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal about Walmart's cyber risk formula, and I shared it with you guys. I hope you had a chance to take a look at it. And the title was "In Walmart's Cyber Risk Formula, Every Bug Has a Backstory," which frankly is a terrible title for the article, but if you want to look it up, that's what it's called. But I found it interesting because most articles or most really stuff that's written about cybersecurity assumes that cybersecurity is the same, that it's a discipline, that it's something, that it's this overarching thing that you all need to do. And the implication is that it's the same for everybody, the same set of controls, the same set of whatever. And don't get me wrong, there's frameworks out there and all that crap. I'm not saying that there's not structure to it, but this article talks about Walmart's approach to cybersecurity, and they brought in this dude to run cybersecurity for them who came from Raytheon. So he came from the defense industry. And when he came to Walmart, he put together a panel of people to help them decide what they were going to do, reassess and decide what they're going to do cybersecurity wise. And none of them were actually technology people. They were
Very smart.
They were actuaries. They were insurance people. Yeah. They were auditors. They were people that in his words, I'll see if I can find the quote when one of y'all starts talking again. But basically it was about, I wanted people who understood risk. And then I figured we'd figure out the technology side of that after we figured out the risk. What was it about Walmart? What was the risky? How do we rank risk here? What are the most important things? Then we go apply, the right kinds of cybersecurity technologies, plans, et cetera, to it. And I found that eerily similar and reflective of the way we think about sort of technology writ large. So I was just curious if y'all had the same reaction when you read the article.
Now that you're done talking, I'll stop reading. I was going to check out while you were talking. That's what he said he's going to do.
Yeah, I don't need to listen to you guys. I listen to you all
out.
damn day.
Zone out,
I mean, come
zone
on.
out and find your quote
awesome. Yeah.
on that piece of paper you got.
I was going to start
printed.
looking at other shit while you're talking.
Yeah.
Let me just chime in real quick and say, I think back to one of our events several years back, and it was a security-based event. And to me, the guy that stole the show was with one of our partners, and he was the VP of risk, I think risk and governance.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And while everybody else was talking security and creating fear with the need and the bad actors and the ransomware and the breaches and all these things and what you need to do in order to protect yourself from all of those things, he talked specifically, very much like this guy, about risk and like, who cares? When does it matter? Why does it matter? Because you can't do the same thing. Like, everybody could do the same thing, but if 5 of the events that take place don't really negatively impact you, then who gives a shit? Like,
right.
It doesn't matter. But that's the world we're living in right now. It's like close every door, lock every window, put laser beams on everything and keep them all out. And his point is that the areas that we don't care if they get in or not, then who cares? Like, it doesn't matter. And I just don't think that's the way most are looking at it. I think they're freaked out by all the stuff that's happening, and they want to lock everything down they possibly can, and they're locking down stuff that is becoming an inconvenience to their end users that doesn't matter.
It happens all the time. I mean, that same article brought up, I think it was in the article, it talked about an index or a formalized scorecarding system, right? NIST has one. I can't remember.
CIVS or something.
Yeah, and there's a CVSS. That's for the
CVSS,
National Association
yeah.
of Corporate Directors.
Yeah,
but
so-
again, it's a generic kind of it's a generic thing.
And somebody else is rolling Zoom or somebody's rolling.
Yeah,
Zoom.
Zoom's rolling
one
out.
that they
So-
built for kind of.
I mean,
similar.
a lot of that, though, it's somewhat of an arms race that goes on. It's like, I've got a nuke. Well, you need a bigger nuke. Well, you need even bigger nukes. I'm like, at some point, it's mutual assured destruction, right? So, like, all the tools and all this other stuff just gets a little bit ridiculous. And, the guy you're talking about at that event we had, I thought was great, because you had all these people saying, spend this money, do these things. You got to have all this stuff. And he's like, well, if you spend $10,000 to insure your dollar in your wallet, like, where does that make any sense?
Right.
Now, that's more of an operational kind of look at things. There's also a compliance look, and you've got certain things that you have to do, whether they, I would argue a lot of times compliance doesn't benefit any of the organizations that have to remain compliant directly.
Other than it allows you to stay in business.
Correct. Yes. Which arguably is probably for a horseshit reason too. But
But that's the game.
that's just, it is what it is. And so, when you look at these things, I do think I see a lot of IT security leaders, and I could air quote that if you could see it, that stand on a high horse and go, nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. Can't do this. Can't do that. And they're kind of the progress prevention team. And at some point, I feel like the business should start to challenge, go, why? I mean, not. I get where they're coming from, but what if? Like, okay, so it prevents X from happening. What is X? What is the operational and the financial impact? What is the true risk of X? And it's many times I don't think it's defined. So it's not really any shame on the IT security professional. No one's told them these are the important things, and this what needs to be.
We saw
there.
that in recently in a couple of the M&A /
totally
situations where security was saying no, and
Unbelievable.
A couple of times internal people were like, "Why? Why are you? Why? Give me a good reason." And they couldn't do it, and so they let it go. They're like, "Oh, okay," because they didn't have a framework for
nothing
for
to
them,
substantiate it.
It was almost like, well, my spidey sense says we shouldn't do that. And it's like, Walmart had this thing where they identified kind of their key things that, kind of their key drivers, their most important sort of components to the business. They considered productivity, the company's reputation, and customer trust when assessing the potential impact of a vulnerability. And what this dude said, I thought was great. At the end, he was like, if it's Walmart customer data exposed to the internet, we break glass and get everybody in and get it fixed.
Yeah.
Right.
So they know the risk. But what that also means that if it's not that, then maybe everybody doesn't do all that. Yeah. It's not a one size fits all. Yeah. It's really identified where do we feel like our key vulnerabilities and our key risks are, and it can't be everything because you can't run a business that way.
Yeah, I think that's key, and it goes back to the guy that you and I are both referencing. It's like, what are the key vulnerabilities? Where is the risk? And I think the executives and the stakeholders of the business would much rather appreciate that kind of conversation than a conversation about, we got to spend all this money, we got to lock everything up.
Classically in IT, rarely does anyone ask the question behind the question, or better yet, the question behind the question behind the question. It's just, this is confusing stuff. It's technically over my head, and so therefore you tell me, and then I'm going to take that at face value and off you go. So, I'm not defending either side of that, but I think that by and large, IT security just scares the hell out of people, and it's what they don't know. So you just tell me.
I mean, let's face it. Our mantra at this company, right, is that technology is just a tool to help you do business.
Correct.
Cybersecurity, prevention, whatever you want to call it, it's just another tool. Right. I mean, it really is. It's a form of insurance in a way of helping you be able to do business. And so you've got to find a way to figure out what your real risks are that are inherent to your business, and then go look for either structures or different types of approaches, tools, people, whatever it is that map to those risks. Yeah. And then understand that the others, yes, you're exposed to risk, but the risks just aren't that big. So it's not worth the same reason you don't buy, $0 deductible insurance for everything, right? You're like, I'm willing to assume some risk because it's not worth it.
Right.
It's just not worth it.
I think a lot of times the business and what I call risk managers, or people who have good optics on where they have risk tolerance, are not engaged with the IT security folks. Yeah. And a lot of times the most successful thing I've seen is where you've got security, if you will, or compliance are separate from IT. And that gives a certain sort of separation of church and state around initiatives and agendas and that sort of thing. And for whatever reason, the business seems to talk better with people who are not in IT. For whatever, again, I don't understand it, but well, maybe I do to a degree.
But although the most successful ones are very fluent in that.
Yeah, correct.
Right?
They know how to kind of bridge the gap
clear.
there. Yeah. So, I feel sorry for the IT security guys who's brought in with a little bit of sort of vague leadership that says, I need you to lock this place down. We can't have an event like such and such company or whatever. And then they give them no guidance and no view into the back. So all they can do is be paranoid and overzealous.
And they become the no guy, and everyone just tries to stay away from it.
And I've seen it happens all the time. Yeah. And I'm like, the guy's not an asshole. Like he's trying to do his job, but you've told him, I need. It's like going to a doctor and going, I want to be the healthiest I can be in my life. And then you go, well, that guy won't let me, drink and smoke and everything else. I'm like, well, duh. I mean, that's part. You've told him what you told him. Yeah, you have to be perfect. It's a double standard. It's difficult, but
I just found it. I thought it was an interesting article. So much of what I read about cybersecurity is sort of the same. We've gotten kind of the same storyline. Company has an event, people go in and assess, and they're like, oh, we should have done X, Y, or Z, and then they see the light and start spending money and are a little bit chastened and that kind of thing. And it's like, this was a very interesting. I mean, this was a guy who was like, we're not protecting against everything. We've decided what's most important. We're focusing on those. And if that means that the Russian hackers or whatever figure something out around areas that don't matter to us, it doesn't mean we won't do anything. We're not going to spend a ton of money worrying about it.
I think it's smart. I think so. If you look, NIST is whatever the graduated score. They've come out, version 2, version 3, so on and so forth. But I don't really see anywhere in there where they've really captured that nuanced sort of context, right? Of what's our most important thing and how are we going to.
I think it's hard for them because they're trying to. They literally it's a universal model, right?
Correct.
That's from every business, from this one to Walmart. Yeah. Right? I mean, that's a gigantic range of difference. In terms of what you're trying to do and what potential risks might look like. So. All right, guys. I think we've been going for a while. I know Brian's got to get to a super exciting sporting event.
Middle school lax.
Middle school girls lacrosse. There's going to be some serious contacts. People getting their chops knocked off. It's going to be awesome.
Let's wear those cool glasses, though.
As always, thank you for listening. We'll be back probably next month for another Cut the Shit After Hours, and look for an episode to drop, I believe, next week. Although I'm not sure when this will be released, so. Just scratch that. Just pay attention on Tuesday. Every other Tuesday, there's a new episode coming out. Maybe it'll be this one. Maybe it'll be something else.
So there you go.
You guys have a great day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See ya.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on TikTok @CutTheShitPod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel @Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.